All right, last year I embarked on my Pokemon journey. I started with Gen 1, Gen 2, doing Pokemon Nuzlocke. I'm currently Nuzlocking Gen 3, specifically in this one, Pokemon Emerald. I have gone down a very dark, deep hole of Pokemon stats, how best to make my Pokemon perform and get the most out of my Pokemon in Nuzlocke specifically. I have found what is known as IVs and EVs, and I'm going to explain what they are, what the differences between the generations were, and also what they mean to you, the Pokemon trainer. All right, guys, welcome to the House of Jacobs. Today we are going to go over IVs and EVs and what they are, essentially. It's going to be a very basic high-level type thing. There'll be some numbers thrown in, but hang in there and we will delve in and you'll know why you should even care. All right, we'll start with the definitions. IVs are individual values and EVs are effort values. So what's an individual value? An individual value is like a hidden number on your Pokemon that is randomly assigned when it's generated. These values determine the Pokemon's stats of HP, defense, special attack. IVs are a set of values that are unique to each Pokemon, meaning that two Pokemon of the same species that are generated in front of you at the same level can have completely different IVs. Values represented by a number between 0 and 31 for each stat, with a higher number indicating higher potential. Think of IVs as genetics. It's what your Pokemon is genetically born with. And the only way to change IVs would be later on in the Pokemon journey. You have IV trainers, but before that, it was just breeding. And we'll go over that in the generation differences. On the other hand, EVs are effort values. Essentially, think of this as training. Again, Pokemon are assigned different numbers when they're generated, but on this one, you can actually train your Pokemon to become stronger. This is where you, the Pokemon trainer, becomes very important. EVs nowadays are generally represented by a number between 0 and 252 for each stat, and a Pokemon can have a maximum of 510 EVs across all stats. These values can be trained and distributed by the player to make their Pokemon stronger in specific areas. So in summary, IVs are randomly assigned and determine the Pokemon's potential, genetics. EVs are effort values, also randomly assigned when you first get the Pokemon, but can be affected by training, vitamins, such effort, okay? All right, so how do you tell what IVs or EVs your Pokemon have? In the early generations, think Generation 1 and 2, they were randomly assigned values between 0 and 15 for IVs. This meant the maximum possible IV for any stat given was 15, with a total maximum of 90. Again, that changed in Generation 3, going to a maximum of 31, 0 to 31, and 186 total across all the stats is the top number. The IV change was significant because it increased the potential for each Pokemon to have higher overall stats and allowed for more precise customization of your Pokemon's strengths and weaknesses. So, technically, a Pokemon generated in Generation 1 and 2, its counterpart in 3 and 4 would have better genetics going forward with and potential going forward throughout the rest of Pokemon. How can you tell your Pokemon's IVs specifically? Well, that didn't come until Generation 3, when you could talk to a Pokemon IV judge. Basically, they would give you the potential of your Pokemon, just telling you kind of something along the lines of, hey, your Pokemon's HP is its strongest characteristic, which would indicate that your Pokemon has a very high IV in HP. Now, that doesn't give you the exact numbers, but it gives you an overall kind of judgment of what your thing was. All right, the system becomes quite different in the 6th generation, which is Pokemon X and Y on the 3DS. In these games, players could view a Pokemon's IV by pressing the Judge button on their summary screen, which would display a message from an NPC character that would indicate that each IV values for each stat. Much different than, hey, this is its stronger stat. It actually gives you values by doing that. And then in Generation 7, the IVs were switched over to that summary page, but in a graph instead of on a judge button, thus making it much simpler from Generation 7 going all the way forward. This includes the remakes, from what I understand, of like Let's Go Eevee, Let's Go Pikachu, and all of that going forward. So that'll be much easier for breeding and such for the IVs. EVs are a whole different thing. The mechanics of EVs have remained largely the same across all Pokemon generations. However, there is a difference once again between the early generations, Gen 1 and 2, versus Gen 3 and beyond. There was even a change further on down the gens, which we'll go over. But the mechanics are all still the same. Essentially, you beat a Pokemon in battle, you gain EV points. In Gen 1 and 2, get this, there were 65,535 points available for upgrading. Take the example of a Mew. When you beat a Mew, you essentially got 100 points across all of your stats in your effort value. So if you beat 656 Mews, you would go ahead and max out all of your effort value stats. So Generation 3, we saw another big change, this time in the effort values. The total number of EVs you could have were 510, I believe, across all of your stats, and with a limitation of 255, I believe, in one specific stat. This meant that you had to specialize your Pokemon, taking either physical attack or special attack or maxing out speed, whatever, or just spreading that across the whole thing, but you only had a total of 510. In this case, when you beat a Pokemon, you only got 1, 2, or 3 points put into a specific stat depending on the Pokemon that you beat. I'll put a link to a list below that gives you an entire list of all of the Pokemon and what stats that they give you going forward. In Generation 6, they made a slight change to the specific numbers on the one stat having 252 versus 255. So if you took a Gen 5 Pokemon that had 255, moved it over to Gen 6, it would essentially bump down to that 252 mark. Not a huge change, but still had that whole 510 total. Now, could you see these in any easy way? The answer in Gen 1, 2, and 3, no, you couldn't. There's no real way to see them. Kept training, you felt like you got to the number that was right, and I guess you were close at that point. Again, in Gen 7, with the new summary screen for the IVs giving you a graph, EVs were also in that graph on that generation forward. So that's Pokemon Sun, Moon, Ultra Moon, all of that going forward on a 3DS and beyond. You can now see your effort values. I'll go over a whole bunch more stuff for EVs and what you should probably do with them if you're doing a Nuzlocke or whatever on a whole different video. All right, so all of that being said, why should you, the Pokemon trainer, care about IVs and EVs? Well, we'll just go in general. A lot of people like to do competitive fighting and stuff like that when it comes with their Pokemon, doing battling and doing ranked battles and stuff. And these IVs and EVs have a huge determination on what your Pokemon will max out on specific stats. Say you want a Pokemon that has really high defense, it's going to be your tank. It's going to be the one that you want to take all the hits while you're healing up the rest of your group or whatever. You're going to want to focus on training these stats for that Pokemon up. So that would take IVs and EVs. So there'd be a lot of breeding involved, a lot of training involved, and in later iterations of the Pokemon, you could actually train your EVs and IVs through trainers to help speed it up. But either way, the whole point is that you would want to make a very competitive, strong, either physically strong or physically defensive or really high HP Pokemon for competitive battles, or just because you like to be the person that has the strongest Pokemon that there ever was. When it comes to Nuzlocks, however, there are rules for the Nuzlocke that would really play more along the EV line. Because IVs, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. In a Nuzlocke, essentially you get to catch the first Pokemon you encounter on a route. So I might get a Rattata on the first route of Gen 1, and it's gonna have whatever IVs it has. So all of the training I do after that, the items I give it, are going to make the EVs even more powerful. So if I'm giving it items to increase its attack, it'll have a much higher attack. Rattatas, specifically, being a physical attacker, I might also want it to have really high HP and really high defense and be more tanky so it doesn't get taken out in one hit, while it's waiting for that Hyper Fang to really smack down the enemy. That's the only thing as a trainer that you can specifically have any real change in when you're doing your Pokemon. As a Nuzlocker, you cannot go and breed Pokemon to get the best IVs and then move them over to do EV training. That's not how it works in Nuzlocks. You get Pokemon randomly on the route, and you have to deal with that Pokemon the rest of your Nuzlocke. So if you want the best chance, you might be grinding in the Wishmer Cave, essentially, in a Pokemon Emerald, really trying to get 1 extra HP on your EV in the background, which could be hundreds of HP total when it comes to a level 100 Pokemon. So that's the quick down and dirty on EVs and IVs, why they're important to you, and what they really are. I'm gonna do other videos specifically showing you how to get your EVs or your IVs all trained up or bred properly, and what some of the nuances are to that and how they really affect your numbers, and show you those later on. But if this has helped you in any way to understand better why this even matters to you as a Pokemon trainer, hit the subscribe, the like, the cool little bell that tells you when we're live. We play video games live, Pokemon games, Nuzlocks, and all that stuff. And give us a comment. Let us know if you have any questions. I can cover those in other videos later on. But that's it for us today, guys. Thank you very much, and we'll see you the next time on the House Jacobs.